Welcome to In-House Legal Uncovered, a Major Lindsay and Africa podcast exploring what it takes to make it in-house.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of In-House Legal Uncovered. My name is Michael Sachs, and I am a partner at Major Lindsay in Africa and our in-house counsel recruiting group. My practice is helping to conduct general counsel searches and other senior-level in-house searches for all types of companies, from Fortune 100 companies to family-owned organizations and everything in between. The theme of this podcast is candid and engaging conversations with leading individuals in the legal industry, and many of my guests so far have been general counsels or other senior lawyers. I wanted to go in a different direction from time to time and talk to other people in the legal space who have roles and career stories that are unique and dynamic. And that's where my guest today comes in. I'm really excited to introduce him. I've known this guy for maybe 20 years now, and we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But let me say hi to Ramji Kaul, who is the Assistant Dean for Career Planning at the University of Michigan, which is first in Ramji's heart, my law school alma mater, but only second in my little heart. Ramji, welcome to the In-House Legal Uncovered podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Appreciate being here.
Great. I'm going to give the folks just a bit about your background, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So Ramji graduated from the University of Michigan from both college and law school. After graduating from the law school in 2005, Ramji joined the Chicago office of Dentons, then known as Sonnenschein, Nath, and Rosenthal, and was there for 10 years. As a partner in the litigation and disputes group, he litigated cases in the state and federal courts, focusing on complex commercial litigation, catastrophe and major claims litigation, and class action defense. Ramji was the co-chair of the office's summer associate program, and then in 2015, Ramji joined the Office of Career Planning at the U of Michigan and now serves as the Assistant Dean for Career Planning. Ramji, I hope I got that right.
You got it right.
All right. Let's start with kind of an easy one. Let's just start with having you maybe walk through your career a bit, kind of a couple minutes and how you got from there to here, so to speak.
Yeah. So I grew up in Michigan, in the Metro Detroit area, and as you said, went to undergrad and law school here. I went straight through. So as the students now use the phrase, I was K to JD. I learned that one once I got back here. But
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. So K to JD, and made my way out to Chicago after graduation and started at Sonnenschein, as you mentioned. And honestly, I really thought I would be there for 2 to 3 years. My mom was a public school teacher in Flint, and so I grew up listening to public school education issues, policy issues. Never saw myself as a big law lawyer, but wanted to try it out. Financial considerations. I went to school mainly on loans, but saw myself as being at a firm for a couple of years and then, doing something else. And that's a pretty common story, I think, that even students today still come to law school with. But I enjoyed the work. I really enjoyed the people that I was working with, you being one of them. And, just kind of put my head down and did a good job and looked up, a number of years later and was a partner at the firm. So it was a ton of fun. There was nothing that I was running away from, but for personal reasons, my wife and I wanted to return to Ann Arbor. We met here in undergrad. Her family's still here. My family was still in the Michigan area as well. We had a couple of young children, and so I started looking for opportunities in the Detroit area. And I looked at what it would be like to practice in a firm here. As you mentioned, my practice was large class action kind of work, and more specifically as it, towards the time when I left, it was a lot of catastrophe work. And so even as that work lives around the country, it's generally sourced out of the major metropolitan areas, the New York, Chicago's. So the practice didn't really live in Detroit as much. But somebody sent me a posting to this opportunity in the career planning office at the law school, knowing that I love Michigan, knowing that I had joked at times that I would always love to come back here. And so I thought about it. And it really, being a first gen professional, being somebody who really had no idea what they were doing while they were in law school, having been involved in associate mentoring and that kind of work at the firm, it really, I thought, boy, this would be a great way to pay it forward. This would be a wonderful way to sort of do all of the things that alums and others had done for me, help me avoid some of the potholes. And so I saw it as a form of service. But it's a big financial change. It's a big career shift, and so I kept mulling over it, and finally, my wife gave me, a wonderful piece of counsel. She said, "Listen, Ramji, you've got a couple of choices here. You can keep talking about this job, and you can apply for it. You can stop talking about this job and don't apply for it. But what you may not continue to do is keep talking about this job and not apply for it." And it was some of the best career planning advice I think I've ever had. So I threw my hat in the ring, and the rest has been history so far.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That is great advice. We should pause for a second to discuss how you and I do know each other. So I actually think I met you. So I was coming to Michigan to recruit, as law firm associates do, and I think we met. Was there a pizza party, like a reception or something like that, at what's the big pizza place there? I apologize, I can't remember the name again.
Pizza House, I think.
Yeah, Pizza House, and I think we
Yeah.
met there briefly, and literally you were one of the first people. I mean, I hope that I was one of the first people at Sun and Shine that you met.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then
Absolutely.
I got named your mentor.
Yes.
But that was just like a name, and then I think I left like right after you started, right? I think I
Started,
left like
yeah.
a few months later.
Yeah, but you helped me get through the summer. As a wandering summer associate, great advice, great mentoring. Absolutely.
I was in that jaded, cynical part of my career as like a seventh year and things like that. But no, you were always great. And then we obviously have kept in touch and have kids around the same age. And we do a lot of work for Michigan. You're at Michigan, so we've kept in touch over the years. And one of the people I'm really been proud to know over the years. So beyond my great mentorship for those few months we had, who are the other? And again, we were appointed as mentor. Who are the other people that might have helped you over your career in terms of? Sounds like your wife gave you this great career planning advice. Other people at our old law firm or Michigan that have kind of helped you along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky to have great mentors at every stage, and some of that is what I get to talk to students about now is how do you find mentors, how do you develop and keep in touch with them, but I think of having mentors in all stages of my life. I mean, at the firm, a lot of the big names that you probably know, I was lucky enough to work closely with people like Jeff Leonard and the late Rick Fenton and Bob King and Natalie Spears, Mark Hanover, you, Wendy Anderson. um, and I think I just got really lucky in the sense of those folks collectively, individually, allowed me to grow and to learn. I was as I mentioned, straight through from undergrad, so I was pretty young, naive, even, and they gave me the freedom to learn and allowed me to make mistakes and grow. And so one of the things I get to tell students now is sort of the idea of like this whole thing that we are endeavoring to participate in is called something we call practice. And practice, look up the word, I mean, or quote Allen Iverson, I mean, like practice is getting better through mistake. It's growth through trial and error. And so having people that allow you to grow that way has been invaluable. And now that I've been here at the law school, I've got new mentors. Sarah Zierfoss, who's the dean of admissions, has really taken me under her wing and shown me the ropes of higher education and how to be an effective administrator. That's a totally different skill set than what you might use even as a partner in a law firm.
Yeah, well, we get to that in a second or two. But so when you made that decision to leave, I can't remember if it was Denton's at the time or I think it was Denton's when
It
you
was
left.
Denton's,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll stop calling it Sun and Shine, even though you and I still kind of refer to it a little bit that way. But when you did leave there and you gave up the practice, albeit maybe temporarily at the time, what was that like to make that step? Did you have like those immediate regrets, like right after you'd made the decision, or was it a pretty easy choice?
It was terrifying to make. It felt like, I was standing on you're sort of trained to think like you get onto this path, you've invested all of this sweat equity in terms of building a career, and then to sort of make a dramatic career shift like this, it was scary to sort of arrive at the conclusion that we were going to make this change. But again, like what was driving it was family considerations, and so it gave me courage in my convictions for why we were making the change. But honestly, what made it possible to successfully transition was, again, all these people that I had worked with and built great relationships with. The person who I was one of the people I was most concerned about telling was Rick, who is he was just sort of larger than life. He was sort of always,
Yes.
really taught me all the things about how to be an effective litigator, and you know, so I went into his office and I told him what I was doing, and in a very sort of kind way, he asked me, like, is everything okay? Like, did you, is everything all right at home? Is somebody sick? Like, this is a pretty dramatic change. He used a bit more colorful language than I'll share here, but and once he realized, like, no, this was just change that we wanted to make as a family, it was, well, how can I help? What do you need from me?
Yeah.
And is there something that you can do to any way that you can stay on to help transition the clients and things like that? And so, really, once I made the change and I look back on it, it was like, I felt like I was jumping off of a cliff into some foggy abyss, and really it was just a very small step,
Yeah.
you know.
I think it's that step. It's funny because my family and I just went ziplining over the weekend, and we did this obstacles too. And all the obstacles I told people were like no problem. The biggest problem for me was the ziplining, even though the ziplining is easier because it's that step to just choose that, like, just to leave there, to
Yeah.
leave a platform and go there. And I feel like it's the same way with career moves, which is there's so much talking about it. Once you actually do it, there's very few of those moves that don't ultimately work for people. But
Yep.
the actual step is very, very challenging. And so kudos to you for having made it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's totally the first step. And the thing that's, we can say this, and it's true, and we can know it intellectually, but it's really hard to internalize emotionally, is it's not like all of the experience of practicing law leaked out of my head the minute I
Right.
left the firm. I mean, like, if this had gone poorly, there were still options and alternatives. It's one of the great parts about being a lawyer, but it's really hard to internalize that in the moment.
Fair enough. So, from your just day to day perspective of just like not the details, but like think about comparing what your life was like day to day as a partner in big law versus what your like day to day is, at Michigan each day. Those are two different lives. Like, how do you just what's the 30,000 feet vibe that's different between those two? We can imagine, but what is it like?
I mean, it's interesting also how it's changed as I've been in this role a lot longer. We're in year 8 now. I've been moved back here, but there's some things that are obvious. I have a bit more control over my time now than I did when I was in practice. Like, there's no TROs necessarily in this job. I mean, we don't have that sort of sense of urgency. Um, but these jobs also allow you to employ, as I tell my team, sort of what we can do is really only limited by our bandwidth and our imagination. And so if you want to sort of still bring that same intensity to this work, I mean, there's certainly plenty to do. There's an unlimited amount of improvement that we can make. There's an unlimited amount of impact that we can have on students' worlds. But there isn't that same sort of emergency that happens. I think that's the biggest day-to-day change.
Yeah. So let's talk about those students a little bit. I feel like I'm sort of when I was thinking of questions to ask you, but it's a very broad question. But like, what are students like these days? I mean, so much of my life and so many of the general counsels and other lawyers that we're working with and my colleagues, we're so many years removed away from law school now, and it's I imagine in some ways they're not that different from those being there 20 years ago, but in some ways they're probably incredibly different. So how do you describe the students these days, having
Yeah,
gone through everything they've gone through and what they're like?
yeah. I mean, I think that that's right. I also sort of, you know, um, it was just joking with somebody yesterday that every year I get a year older and the students stay the same, and so my distance from the students in terms of proximity of age and experiences is growing ever so every year. But you're right. I mean, they are incredibly impressive. I think they are, in terms of the things that they've accomplished before they come to law school. It seems to me like they've done quite a bit more, certainly, than I did, and what I feel like most of my peers in law school did. And so
Yeah.
they come to law school with, I think, much more accomplished in so many different dimensions. Their understanding of the world, their understanding of legal issues and what they want to do with their time. But in a lot of ways, they are so much the same. You know, one of the, I think, big revelations I had when I came back to this role was um, they still have all of the same insecurities that certainly that I did as a law student, that my friends did as law students. They struggle with the same challenges in terms of entering into a legal profession that has a lot of barriers to entry, a lot of challenges, and some of those challenges have gotten more extreme over time. But so they're both uh, they're both very different, certainly than when we were students, and still very much the same.
So when you, I mean, I recall being incredibly naive when I entered law school and didn't have a lawyer in the family. Um, like, what do students? I mean, what do they talk to you about when they talk to you? Like, what's a conversation like? How do you try to help them? Where do they need that help? Are they? I know this is a multi-part question, but are they
Yeah.
like clear-eyed about their future, or are they just as maybe naive as you and I might have been, 15, 20 years ago? What's that? What does that look like? Take us behind the curtain a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to answer in terms of all students, right? Because they're all
Yeah, of course.
all at different stages and things like that. But I think the first thing is how different the career services components are at large law schools. Certainly here, when you and I were here as students, the career planning office was 2 or 3 people, and now this place is it's a small law firm. I mean, there's 9 attorneys that work in this office. All of us have practiced for some meaningful period of time, and so there's, I don't know, 90 years of collective experience in the office advising students. So, the types of questions that we can field and the kinds of advice it really can vary depending on where the student's at. Um, I think, I don't know, to answer your question, I guess I'll say 2 things. So, um, one is when I tell students, like, what do we do in the office? Like, what are we going to work on affirmatively? I think like lawyers fundamentally do 2 things. I mean, we solve problems and we advocate, and we do that in a variety of different ways for different clients in different venues. But you know, f- what career planning is as a discipline is taking that and applying it to yourself. Like, we're going to learn how to solve problems. In this instance, the problem is, what do I want to do when I grow up, or at least what do I want to do 3 years from now? And then we have to learn how to advocate, but just in self advocacy. Like, how are we going to tell stories about ourselves that are positive? It's really sort of core business development skills. So what do some of our conversations look like? It looks like working on those things. Like, how are we going to educate ourselves about the practice of law, about different practice areas, about different sectors? How are we going to learn how to tell positive stories, to the core business development skills? So we're working on those things. um, but then there's also like a big component of what we do, which is, and I think this is probably one of the most valuable things that we can do with students, is help them understand and make sense of competing advice. So I sort of tell students, orientation and beyond is like, look, you've entered into this legal profession, and newsflash, every lawyer has an opinion about what you should do with your life, and on top of your parents and friends and family and others. And some of that advice is going to be directly in conflict. Some of it may seem like it's in conflict when it's really not. And one of the things what we can do is help the students make sense of competing pieces of advice about what they should do or what matters to employers or something like that. So
Is it
uh,
all? I'm curious. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like
yeah,
I'm
go for it.
curious. When I was there, it was in the tech boom, and so at the end of the day, no matter what you wanted to do, there was this funnel, and everybody went to a large law firm. It was very easy to get offers, and everybody at the end of the day, 95% of us did the same thing. That's got to be a bit different now, right? I mean, they're probably weighing. Many people are still going to those large law firms, but there's got to be other interesting channels they're looking at, or mid-sized firms. Like, is that what they're weighing? Or is that the competing advice they're getting, or is it like the geography, or is it like 2 firms in particular? Like, what are
Well,
maybe those? What's that advice look like?
I'll give you one example. One that comes up pretty frequently, right, is surrounds what do firms do with grades? And so in one ear, the student hears, really what all big firms care about are your grades. Your grades are the only thing that matters. And in their other ear, what they hear is, grades are only a momentary reflection of a particular legal skill set, which is not going to be a predictor of your capacity to be a lawyer and your success in the profession. And those seem like direct conflict. And if you don't really have a clear sense of what it means to be a lawyer, and there are plenty of students who would, I think, agree that they are just as naive as you and I were when we were here as first year law students. It's really hard to make sense of that. Like, what does that mean? And so trying to help students understand what grades mean, what they don't mean, how does an evaluation take place, how do firms use grades, right? It's sort of like that kind of thing. Like, what's the process, and that makes sense. The other part is, how do you make sense of rankings? That's a big conversation both in the law school world right now. It's a big conversation, I think, generally. Medical schools are also facing these same questions.
Yes.
Law firms, what does it mean to be an AmLaw 100 firm, a Vault firm, and so they're trying to make sense of what do these rankings actually mean? How much weight does does an in-house counsel put on the fact that XYZ firm is ranked 4 in Vault and this other firm is ranked 7th? Do they really care? Right. And so, like, trying to give them some advice along the lines of what matters there.
So it's sort of like, on one hand, if they want to have advice on maybe you helping them figure out where they stand, but then also maybe they want to know where these other places sort of stand too, and kind of figuring that out a little bit, maybe that matching part of it.
It's a little bit of the matching, but a lot of it is just contextualizing, what industry information, what does this mean? These days, one of the main questions from students, if you're keeping up with the legal news, there's deferrals of incoming classes. What does this mean for me? Reddit told me X. Above the law told me Y. I heard from another attorney who said Z. Ramji, can you help me make sense of that? So, and that's fun. I mean, it's fun to help students sort of navigate these difficult questions, interesting questions, and give them some perspective.
You mentioned the in-house. I'm curious. My kind of final question in this category is, like, I was going to ask you, are they focused primarily on kind of how they get that first job, or are a lot of them, and I know it depends on every person, but are a lot of them thinking about what my career is going to look like, 10, 15 years later? Personally, I know I was only focused on that first job and I spent no time thinking about that. It's a big mistake by me. Or is it 50-50? What do you see from people?
It's not so much sort of trying to set up dominoes for the next 15 years. I mean, in a lot of ways, when I'm talking with students, I try to dissuade them from that type of approach. I think we don't have the wisdom and insight to set up the dominoes that strategically. One of my professors here, I don't know if you had him as well. He's now the general counsel at Ford, Steve Crowley.
Oh yeah.
He had some great. I had dinner with him and some students a few years back, and he had it's one of the best pieces of career advice. He said, "Listen, career planning, you got to have you got to commit to 2 core principles. 1, you got to have a plan, and 2, you have to be ruthlessly dedicated to deviating from it." And so, this idea that, like, we can set up the dominoes, not so much. But what students do want is to keep those options open. And there was the Harvard law student grad speaker from a few years ago. He has this great line. I'll paraphrase, but essentially he says, like, we are the Netflix generation. If we have 45 minutes to watch a show, we spend 25 minutes trying to figure out which show we want to watch, leaving ourselves very little time to actually watch the show. And the only thing worse than keeping all the doors open is sleeping in the hallway. And that's great. It's a great perspective. And so students want to keep those doors open. So their questions are more like, if I go to this place, will there be doors that are open? Not so much, I'm going to this place so that I can get to the next place.
And that's a hard thing, I think, for particularly as you go on in your career, because maybe not right when you go to since most people in a normal economy go to a big firm, you're not closing any doors. But what I try to tell people is, as you make the moves after that, your second, third, fourth job, there's really no way to avoid closing doors behind you at the end of the day. And the only question is, what are those doors? And you have to accept, as you make big moves like you did and I did, that you are closing some doors, and you're okay with that. And that's really hard for a lot of people to do.
Yeah, and to have the confidence that it's very cliche, but one door closes, other doors open. I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, moving out of my position in a law firm did close some doors, absolutely. And now it's opened others. I mean, so 100%. You kind of got to be okay with that.
So, being an active, thinking about, you in 2015, responding to that ad, applying, what sort of surprised you the most? What would you tell yourself, then, about what you've learned about, is it the students? Is it interacting with the faculty? Is it, you're an assistant dean now? What is it? What didn't you know then that you know now that maybe surprised you the most over the years?
Um, it's an interesting. I think one thing that has one is that I think I mentioned this before a little bit, but how many students sort of have the same insecurities that I did when I was a student, and it doesn't matter their background, their preparedness for practice, anything. I mean, we all sort of are humans and struggle in the same ways. The imposter sort of syndrome that infects so many of us, and so I think it surprised me how many students struggled in the same way I did. I thought it was because I didn't know any lawyers when I got to law school. That's not actually the case. Um, I think the other thing that probably I was not expecting is this job has helped me be a better communicator, helped me be a better parent. I think more critically about emphasizing process rather than results with my kids. um, because we control what you can control. You can't control the outcome necessarily, but you can control your effort. You can control your commitment to improvement. And, so much of what I do is spending time coaching students now about, overcoming challenges academically, overcoming challenges and setbacks that they might perceive to have arisen because of career this, career that, alums that I counsel. I think it's made me a better parent, certainly a better communicator.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. I love that. That's great. Of course, I have to ask the requisite kind of COVID question about what it was like. Part of it, I think one of the reasons I thought about that is because I'd reached out to you in those first like 3 to 6 months, and I don't know if you remember this, but we had a video call, and you seemed very depressed at that point. Maybe I was equally as depressed, and maybe I caught you at a bad day, and you caught me in a decent day. But I remember thinking, wow, this seems really rough right now. So what was it like on the front line then? Like how did students act, faculty?
Yeah.
Give us the. I know that's everybody gets that question, but just take us behind the curtain there too.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as you observe, I mean, it was very difficult. It was very difficult on everybody and in a variety of different ways. The students had their challenges. We certainly had ours in terms of being administrators. The faculty were struggling on their own, to shift the entire way in which classes are taught. I think, you know, a couple of different observations. So one is, in a student facing role, so much of what we're trying to do. I mean, the reason why we're in these jobs, the reason why people are leaving practice to come work in career planning offices is because you have a strong mentoring engine or a strong sort of desire to be helpful. And there was so much happening during COVID, uh, where we were helpless, to sort of help students, right? Like we couldn't fix or we couldn't help support in so many ways. There's anybody who's in higher education talks about, and has probably experienced at some level, we're living in a mental health crisis when it comes to student wellness, and COVID only compounded that. And so some of the structural challenges that we have in higher education got really sort of
Yeah.
pronounced. So it was tough, and that's a hard thing to deal with when we're trying to work with students and be helpful, and they're upset. um, and the other part was just trying to be very empathetic that the student experience was, I think, perhaps more difficult than than certainly my experience, as somebody who's working in a job. Because for all of us, as COVID affected everybody differently. It still is affecting people. I don't mean to diminish that, but for example, there were periods of time where somebody in my family was sick, and so I could downshift a little bit my effort. I could put things off. I could move things around to give myself a little bit more bandwidth to deal with what was happening at home. And the consequence of me doing, instead of an A+ job, an A job or an A- job was, sort of felt, but within the band of what was acceptable. And for students, they were still being graded, right? They're still there. They got to go to class. They still have to perform well on exams. They still have to, they still have competitive components to their on the job front, right? They're trying to be competitive candidates and get out there and interview. And like there was very little ability for them to cycle down and take care of all the same family and personal and sort of world, pay attention to world issues that we were all dealing with. And so I'm very sympathetic to those students that went through COVID at that time. Many of them, sustained periods of isolation. It was tough. It was tough. Luckily, we're sort of coming out of it. I think this last year felt much more pre-COVID. You could tell from a student sort of, I think, sort of like vibe on campus, those kinds of things. We're sort of getting back to the pre-COVID experience, which has been fun.
Yeah, that's a great summary of it. I think, like, again, we could talk about COVID for 38 hours. Nobody wants to do that. And you could argue about how it impacted you at each maybe age of someone's life and status and where they were at, and it affected people differently. And you could point out, well, I'd rather have been here when COVID hit in my life or here. But I would think that the people probably hardest hit are those who lack control of situations and felt at the mercy of other factors. And if you're a student, senior in high school, a college student, a second year associate at a firm, and you feel like you're at the whim and you don't have control in your life, a new parent, with a 1-year-old or something like that, and you just can't do certain things, that's probably had to have been the hardest. I have to imagine. But
yeah, I mean, like I would have student appointments. You've sort of alluded to them. I'm okay, young kids. I've got a 11-year-old, 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and then time of COVID, the 6-year-old was a 3-year-old in preschool, which was closed down. So she was at home with us all day without anything to do. So she participated in a lot of student meetings, some faculty meetings. But that's the kind of flexibility that we were, grace was given to everybody. You got a kid sitting on your lap and everybody sort of shrugs and says, that's the way it is. But the student version of that isn't as accommodating, right? Like I'm not able to go to class this week, okay, that doesn't work, so it's tough.
So kind of a lightning round of maybe some miscellaneous questions I want to see if we can get to. So, you were, humble and said, oh, you've learned these communication skills. I actually think you've always been an excellent communicator since I've known you. But with that said, what are those, to be in a position like yours, like what are those EQ skills that you think you need? Like, what is somebody who's in your job, either there or in a different university? Like, what do you think you need to have to be, working with students all day on these issues? What would you recommend to others who are maybe want to pursue a career in this, over the next, 10, 15 years? What would you say to them?
I mean, some of it is just the idea of practice, right? I mean, I think emotional intelligence, it can be coached at some level. Some of it, improves over time with practice. And so spending a lot of my time listening, sort of turning off the part of the brain that wants to respond immediately when you start to hear a question, I think was a big part in sort of training and improving the communication skills. Some of it is just studying. You start to study concepts of communication. I mean, these are things that we don't necessarily do as junior lawyers or when we get into leadership positions in firms. We don't study leadership concepts. We don't study with the same intensity that we would study our area of expertise in the law. And so doing that has also opened up, new ways of me thinking about how I communicate. And some of it is also what's now referred to as coaching, sort of executive coaching, right? Which is I'm not trying to deliver an answer. I want to tell you what to do, but that's not really my role. My role in a lot of ways is to listen to you, to ask powerful questions, to really help you arrive at a conclusion that makes sense for your value set, for your goals, for your, sort of worldview. And it's not mine, it's yours. And so those are all things that, maybe some skills that aren't entirely necessary in a day-to-day practice in law, but certainly can be helpful, especially when you're talking about team dynamics and operating efficiently.
Yeah. So AI, that's like the topic du jour of 2023. Does it come up where you're at? Do people talk about it? Do students talk about it? Faculty? Is it all the time? Is it not at all? Are students concerned about it?
I think like everybody, we're trying to figure it out, what to do next. I think there are conversations that are happening. There's just like I think you probably get emails like I do, which is this panel's being held to talk about ChatGPT and what do we do with AI and the variety of opinions. Like this is the calculator has finally arrived for lawyers. This is going to be a enormous shift. And there's another group that says this is just like when Westlaw and Lexis really sort of came online. It's like this is efficiencies will be gained. um and I have these conversations with alums and practitioners. I was just having a conversation last night with an attorney at a big firm, and I said, what are you guys doing with AI? And he said, some ironically, uh some of it is really helpful to help humanize some of our work. I can put a letter or a statement into ChatGPT and say like, could you please write this in a letter to a client, and all of a sudden it comes with some of the more soft skills that sometimes attorneys are looking to build. And the other part is the ethical component. I mean, that's certainly going to have to be addressed by firms and by law schools and law students. In a law school, it takes the form of an exam. Is this really your own work? Or in an application, is this really your own work? In an essay, and in practice, it's going to be in the form of, did you really spend, point four doing this, or was this really something you could do in point one now? And that's going to be part of, I think, the evolution of the conversation.
Yeah, and students haven't gotten to that point where they're like worried as it's going to take away my jobs down the road, or to the extent that might be a future worry, they got or imminent worries in front of them.
I think students. I heard I was in actually Chicago at a conference, and they had a group of students, not from Michigan, but they were asking them questions about AI and what did they think about it. And I thought the students had, I'm sure they were prepared at some level, but they had a really thoughtful response, which gave me a lot of hope. And I was just impressed generally. It was this idea of, well, look, information gathering may now no longer be as important of a skill for attorneys. Like over the next 10 to 15 years, really what may become more important is our capacity to analyze, to spot errors in things that are being generated by editing, editing and spotting errors in things that are being generated by computers, and the soft skills that we all know are very important in the practice of law. But the actual go find it may not be as important, or analyze this large batch of information that may be done more efficiently by AI, and that's okay. And I thought, boy, they're right.
That's a fairly nuanced response, something we don't always hear in 2023 society. So that's optimistic. What are the things you're most proud of that you've done in your job? Maybe major accomplishments that keep you kind of doing this, that get you excited, that you go home and tell your family about. What are the things you're most proud about?
Boy, this is they're not the big things. It's
Yeah.
the little things. I mean, you came into this job really because I wanted to work with students, and the notes that I get from students are really sort of some of the best ways of being compensated in this role. I just got an email yesterday from a student who's a second year associate at a big firm, an alum who's a second year associate at a big firm in DC, and she said, you told me this thing during our 1L year, and candidly, I don't remember telling her this. Um, but she said, I mean, I don't remember the specific conversation, but it's
Oh, yeah.
certainly something I told her. And she said, this was absolutely, I know you said it just in passing, but it has revolutionized the way I think about things. I've been doing, it's an exercise of like how to keep yourself organized and things like that. And she said, like, I made it through law school with this advice. I'm such a better lawyer as a result. Like, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And it's that kind of stuff. I feel like it's a bunch of small differences that make up a big change.
You're making me feel bad now. I feel like I didn't write anything to the people in career services when I was there. I should not have. I have to send an. If you have to find out who was there when I was there and send them an email, it's a bad way to go into a weekend for me. I'm feeling bad about that. So alternatively, what are the toughest parts? What's the part of the job that's maybe the most complex? Maybe others don't see it that way, but you found it out over the last 8 or 9 years.
I mean, seeing up close what the mental health crisis in higher ed. I mean, and that the feeling that it's only deepening as time goes on. I think that's the most challenging part. I mean, students don't have career planning problems. Higher ed is organized in a structural way where there's most schools have something like a student life office. They've got an academic advising office. They have a career planning something or another. And students don't have problems that fit neatly into the segmentation of institutions. They just have a problem, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. So the challenging part is, how do you support a student who's suffering let's say in a career search, but suffering because they have really, a challenging mental health issue that they're dealing with, and there's only a limit to what I can do to help them. But deciding, is this an area? How can I help you? Like, can I connect you with other services? Is it even possible for me to help you in the career search before these other things get, squared away and addressed? Like, that's really challenging, and tough to see. Tough to see in a lot of instances.
Yeah. So, what's next for you? I mean, what's coming next for you? What's the next professional challenge you want to tackle? I'm not asking, what job do you want next? Do you have your resume, updated? I didn't mean that, but like, how do you want to grow as a leader? What are you looking to accomplish? Where are you in 5, 10 years? The skills you want to work on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think it's one where, I don't have a specific, this is the job that I want next. I'm pretty happy where I'm at. But that said, I now know what happy looks like for me. I can point to a specific set of skills and a specific set of experiences that would need to exist in any job for me to be excited about it. So, I think the leadership skills that I've built being in this office, I think are ones that I'd love to continue to grow. I mean, I'd love to be a more efficient manager. I'd love to be a better leader. I really think that the part about working with students is important to me. And so whether or not they're students or they're alums, sort of some version of coaching is always going to be part of my career, I think, going forward. Whether that's in a law school or somewhere else. I mean, I hope it's here. I'll be here until this is no longer fun or they tell me I gotta go. But I think it's nice to have a clear sense for what it is that I want to do.
So Ramji, we hear about these hot spots or whatever they're called at other campuses, like at Yale or California. They get a lot of attention on Twitter. Things build up, frustrations and issues, and they get in the news. Without obviously getting into specifics, because you aren't at those places, you don't know the details. How do you think situations like that arise? And are there, now that you've been in a place like this for 8 years, do you think of things that institutions can do to avoid being in the firing line of one of those sort of big nationwide publicity attracting incidents?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, I think a recognition that we live in an increasingly polarized world. And students come to law school with an intention to make change, or at least a lot of students do. They want to be active participants in the conversation for change. And so first recognizing that there's a lot of passion that's being sort of displayed in these things that make the news, I think is one important part of the process, is to recognize that it's sort of it's part of the group that's coming to law school is interested in being change makers, and I think we should applaud that. But at the same time, sort of we have to respect free speech. We're a public institution, we certainly do. And I think a lot of it comes down to, you got to build trust with students. I mean, students have got to know, that if you're trying to advise them on certain approaches that they're taking in terms of advocacy or protest, they've got to trust you as a human, that you're also not just trying to dissuade them from doing something. And and I think there's a particular obligation in law schools. I mean, we're at least for us, we're trying to help them understand that there can be real value in studying the counter argument, as an example. But it's difficult. It's one of those difficulties in law schools and in higher ed that we're going to continue to have to grapple with. And hopefully there's education that's happening along the way.
So end things on one of the things on a more fun note. So you big Michigan football fan. What are your? I just learned that this podcast is going to go out basically around Labor Day. So they'll probably play. I just looked at the schedule. They'll play one game at that point. So it'll be either 1-0 or 0-1 when this goes live. But
they'll be 1-0. They'll be 1-0.
Yeah, I saw the schedule. Looks like 1-0. I don't want to make a horrible thing. And I am a general Michigan fan. You are a huge Michigan fan. But what is your prognosis? Is it 14-0, 15-0, or whatever? Or are you more tempered?
Oh no, I'm never tempered. I'm it's a national championship or bust. We're a complete team this year. I think that the schedule lines up well for us. I think this is a national championship season. I'll go all in on being a maize and blue Kool-Aid drinker.
I love that. I'm more of actually, I mean, I do root for Michigan for sure, and I root for them over Ohio State, but I'm kind of a Big Ten fan. So when both teams lost this year, I would have been incredibly depressed, except that I actually had to go to the hospital that night for an emergency procedure. And so actually, I didn't have the chance to be depressed because I was feeling horrible at the time. Otherwise, I probably would have been really bummed out that night. But I think Michigan's going to do great this year. I don't know about 15-0. You're definitely more optimistic, but you might know a lot more than I do. It's probably true for sure.
I'm going to go with that. Yeah, they're just complete. They're stacked complete. It's one of the most complete team that I think Harbaugh's had. So we're excited to have a great season.
As you know, I'm a big Illinois fan, so it's the same thing every year. 6-6, baby. It's the race for 6.
Last year was a very close game. My heart.
Yeah, I think we actually until the TCU game, I think we were the team that gave Michigan the biggest run for their money.
Absolutely.
So I'll take that for sure. Well, Ramji, thanks for joining us today. As always, great to speak with you. I'm going to be at my reunion in October. I hope we have the chance to see you there at the next Denton's alumni event, which hopefully you and I can both go to.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for having me, and go blue.
So that will do it for this episode. We'd love to get your feedback on these podcasts. Feel free to email me at msachs@mlaglobal.com and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like and any suggestions for future topics of episodes. In the meantime, you should see one of these podcasts every month and look for the next one as soon as it becomes available. So long, everyone.
Thank you for listening to In-House Legal Uncovered. Join us next time as we dig into another topic that will better help you navigate your in-house legal career.